Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Future of XYZ. I am super excited to introduce a conversation on the future of documentary film and documentary filmmaking with my longtime and dear friend, Chiemi Karasawa. Chiemi, thank you so much for being here on Future of XYZ.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting.
Well, in this episode, we're going to be talking about what you know really well. I mean, you founded a company in 2005 called Isotope Films, which produces all kinds of narrative stories, I would like to say. I want to give you a chance to talk about that. But you've won an immense number of awards, both as a director, but also as a producer in the documentary space. But you spent your career, in the film industry. I just want to ground people first and foremost, based on your experience and expertise in this subject. What is documentary film? Like, how do we define it?
Well, it seems like everything about documentaries become pretty fast and loose over the years. I think originally documentary filmmaking was intended to be a nonfiction motion picture that was primarily for the purposes of instruction, education, historical document or record. And then over the years, for instance, one of the more recent definitions of it was Per Lawrence defines a documentary film as a factual film, which is dramatic, which is interesting because some documentary films aren't dramatic. And they say that it stands out from other types of nonfiction for providing an opinion, a specific message, along with the facts that it conveys, which is like your own form of documentation. And then I think that documentary filmmaking can be used certainly as a form of journalism, advocacy, personal expression, any of those things. But now the genre has become so morphed that and so influenced by narrative filmmaking because people want it to look like something else, feel like something else. And in some ways, I feel like it goes in and out of these styles where, there was like the Penny Bakers and the Maisels who had a very cinema verite approach where it was handheld and you really felt in the moment. Whereas now documentary series are very structured to be like true crime series, or they're structured to be like thrillers, or they're structured to be like narrative films. And, it's really stretching the medium. But some people would argue that that's only enhancing what it is. And some people, like to stick to more direct cinema approaches. So it's been many things over the years.
Well, it's so interesting that you mentioned true crime because obviously network TV has a little bit of an obsession with, we'll just call it reality TV, true crime, all of this. And your point is well received, which is I always think documentary film as like some bigger story of fact. That's kind of how I think about it. And okay, one could argue that true crime and reality TV is that, but it doesn't have the heft. It's, in my opinion, and the storytelling power that a real documentary film does. I mean, we will air just the Thursday after the Oscar Awards. The 95th Oscar Awards happened in Hollywood at the Dolby Theater. Last year, Summer of Soul, which was Questlo's film, of this old footage from the 1969, Harlem, cultural, I guess, summer series, won the award. I mean, that told a story, but it's also so interesting the way it mixed, in my opinion, kind of these different kind of components. As we go in, right now before the Oscars, what are you most excited about in the genre at the moment, based on kind of who's been nominated, et cetera? I mean, you're a member of the Academy, Chiemi, so you obviously seen a lot of these, or all of them, including the shorts and the long and everyone in between.
Well, I think, certainly when I was watching, and there's so many films to consider, and you kind of go through just an unbelievable amount of considerations for the nominees. And a lot of times, some of your favorite films don't quite make it. I have to point out, there's a beautiful film by Margaret Brown called Descendant, which is about a slave ship that was discovered off the coast of Louisiana. It's a beautiful film. It certainly deserved to be a nominee. The filmmaking was gorgeous. And again, I think what's interesting about what becomes a nominee has a lot to do these days with the promotion. And so certain films that don't quite have the push or enough, endorsement by various powers that be don't often make it over the edge. But of the nominees right now, I'm really excited about a film called All That Breathes, which is a film by Shaunak Sen, and it documents these brothers living in Delhi who have a it's not a conservancy, but they take in wounded birds. They have these kite birds that are being felled by pollution and other disasters that they nurse back to life. And the way that he documents this story is really lyrical and poetic, and it takes its time. And they're not your typical protagonists of any film. They don't exhibit huge emotions. They don't go through any traumas with an exorbitant amount of drama. It's just something that slowly unfolds and gets under your skin. And I think he said in a recent conversation I watched that he was shooting them for 4 months before he realized that that wasn't the technique that he wanted to use to present the story. And along with his editor and another filmmaker, he came upon a situation where you put cameras on sliders and you just slowly let things roll for many, many, many hours at a time. Wow. And then crafted the story over 3 years. So
it's heavy on editing.
Yeah, very heavy on editing, but also very heavy on filming. I mean, when you think of like the film to actual story ratio, it was probably 1,000 to 1. You know what I mean? Of filming hours to actually what ends up in the film. And sometimes I think that's what it takes to tell a story is time. Time is your friend. Watching something unfold over time and really understanding what you're going to value about the situation is usually completely different than what you go into a story with expectations of. And that's what I think is really exciting, is like that discovery as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, as a journalist, watching a story and then seeing, oh my gosh, the story is not what I thought it was going to be. The story is actually this. Who knew?
I mean, what I love about that, and I want to talk about some of your films. I mean, you've produced everything from Billy the Kid back in 2008 to AKA Jane Roe, which was so amazing about the actual Jane Roe and Roe v. Wade. You've filmed, Aretha Franklin or Amazing Grace. You produced that, Blue Note Records. I mean, you've done a lot of things, but your directorial debut was, with Elaine Stritch, the actress. And of course, she passed away reasonably quickly after it, or maybe right before it debuted at Sundance in 2014. I mean, talk to me a little bit, because that was, I feel like you gave that time to develop as a producer and as a director and built a relationship along the way that was quite intimate. In terms of that kind of giving time to the story to unfold, talk a little bit about what makes that kind of a documentary so unique, and is it different when you're telling the story of a person, which is, of course, you can go in with an idea but you don't know, versus the narrative of something historical, where you might think you already know all the facts or have all the facts.
Right. I just wanted to make a little correction on that. We premiered at Tribeca, not at Sundance.
Okay. Sorry.
We weren't ready for Sundance, but yeah, all of the films that I get involved with are very character-driven stories. That's kind of my happy place, is when you start with somebody's story and you really have a perspective on something that they're going through, or trajectory. I think issue-oriented films are amazing. And you have to approach them with a certain amount of objectivity, and you're presenting all, perspectives around something. And I find them much harder to invest myself in. Whereas once you get into a single character or a single couple of characters, it really personalizes things, and you can become quite intimate with them, as I learned. And it certainly is a different experience, because it's only their experience, but somehow that can be really relatable. You know, there are things about Elaine, and it took me a while to get to know her, because I think initially she had very preconceived ideas of what a documentary about her would be like. And I think her solo performance show at Liberty, which was documented by D.A. Pennybaker and Chris Hedges, was beautifully done. But I met Elaine when she was sort of in the twilight of her life, and she was still hanging out at the Carlisle. She had this stint on 30 Rock that made her, that put her back in pop culture, so to speak. And she was still wanting to perform her one-act show and have a national tour of it. And I just thought, for somebody that's 87 years old that I came across at a beauty salon.
That's how you all met?
Yeah, we a friend of mine, they have a salon on 57th Street, and I was only lucky enough to be able to go there because I know them. So I get a hugely discounted haircut. But my hairdresser one day said, I was sitting in the chair, and I guess she was the next customer. She was going to the shampoo station, and I had worked with her in narrative film not too long before that, because my first 15 years in the film business, I was working in narrative feature film and television as a script supervisor.
And during that time, I just have to interject. Chiemi Karasawa, script supervisor, I mean, worked with the biggest names in Hollywood. I mean, you worked with Stephen Frears, Martin Scorsese, Jim Jarmusch, Sam Mendes, I don't know, Spike Jonze, I believe. Like, you worked with the biggest names in the industry. And so I'm curious how you also, and I want to hear the Elaine story, but like, you switched from narrative to documentary at some point.
Well, I actually intended to go into, I always, when I went to undergrad film school at Boston University, I really wanted to be a director, but I knew that, once you get out of film school, no one's going to give you a job as a director. And back then, it wasn't really the digital era, so it wasn't so easy to make films about yourself or films by yourself and put them on YouTube, for instance. You still had to get your film developed. You had to, cut it, spice it all together, and pay lots of money for all.
I was going to say, that's expensive too.
Yeah, it's really expensive. So I got a job on a film set as an assistant to a producer who was making an independent film at New Line Cinema called Hanging with the Homeboys. And I got to really see firsthand that you needed to spend a lot of time figuring out what all these 50, 60, 100 people do on set before you're going to march on set and be a director. And I decided that the script supervisor had the best vantage point. She had a chair next to the director. She had headphones. She was watching the monitor. She didn't have to coil cable. And I thought, oh, what an easy job that must be. And unfortunately, as many people will tell you, it's one of the hardest jobs on set, because you're in charge of all the camera notation, lenses, heights, focal distance, scene numbers, mag rolls. At that time, we're still rolling film. You're in charge of cueing the actors on the script. You're in charge of writing all the notes that then go to the editorial department so the editor can figure out what takes are which. And then you're also in charge of this thing called continuity, which is matching an actor's actions from the wide shot to the close-up to 3 months before when they walk in the door, and then you're at a different location when they walk in the door. You got to match the hand the suitcase was in, the purse is on the shoulder, the hair. And it's just like a hornet's nest of fact and detail that I was not prepared to embrace. But I did it, and I
15 years you did it successfully.
Yeah, I think one thing in this industry that really defines your trajectory is your relationships. You end up really having these close relationships with your colleagues, directors, cinematographers, ACs, heads of all the departments that are in charge of continuity. You eat 3 meals a day with these people from anywhere from 2 to 8 months. And you get to know each other very intimately. It's like a modern day circus where you live together, you go on location together, and it really has all that drama and excitement and intimacy. But the relationships that you build, when the new circus comes to town, when the next thing, it's all about the quality of time you spent together, how valuable you were. And I find that directors and people that like to hire me over and over again, it was because I became part of a filmmaking team, not just because I sat there like some court stenographer and took down facts and details. It's like, how is this person going to help me make my next movie? Are they going to be, constructive with me? Are they going to help understand what the vision is and what I do or don't need to know about specific, annoying details? And I think that, I really pride myself on having relationships with complex people. We're all artists are complicated. All situations are going to be very fueled, and did this person help me in those moments? So that's kind of more what I take pride in is having those types of relationships.
Well, what I love, I mean, I think you absolutely should take pride in that, and knowing you as a friend as I do, none of this comes as a surprise. But what's interesting about it, in terms of your founding of Isotope Films in 2005, which is a New York City-based production company, you really talk about in kind of marketing. I know you don't do that, but in the About Us, it's really about character-driven true stories. And what you're talking about here in terms of the relationships, you were talking about characters, and you're talking about telling true stories. So is that the bridge that got you into documentary? It's just observing all these people and wanting to tell the story?
Well, sorry, I think I veered off of the original question, but so I learned while I was making in film school and making feature film that I loved documentary film as well as narrative film. And I felt like I didn't mind the difference between the two of them. As long as they're telling me a compelling story and I can get in there with the characters and really go to this other place, it didn't matter whether it was a true story or a fictional story that was well told. So in my endeavor to start making, branching out from being a script supervisor to starting my own business or becoming a director or producer, I, just by sheer coincidence, I was renting an office space from a woman named Jennifer Vendetti, and she had a casting agency. And I was actually producing a narrative short film at the time, and she came and was like, let's have coffee. I want to talk to you about a story that I want to tell. So she pitched me a documentary film. At that point, I was not making documentaries, and thankfully, neither Jennifer or I seemed to know the difference of what that would entail as a producer. But she said, there's this, I cast real people off the streets of wherever, and I put them in ads and commercials.
Because I worked with Jennifer in the fashion.
Yeah, she's very well known. She's amazing at what she does. She's definitely singular in her vision of things, and known for that. So she said, yeah, I find people that have really interesting stories, and then watch the transition from them becoming totally obscure in their own lives to becoming like national billboards or movies or whatever. And I think that's fascinating. So she said, I want to make a film about the various people that this happens to. And so we thought we were going to make sort of an omnibus character-driven story about all these people. And in fact, I just bought like a Panasonic video camera and DV, which is like the highest form of video at the time, which is ridiculous now when you think of all the HD and all the different technical aspects that are out there now. But so I had this camera, I had a lav. I'm like, why don't we just start shooting some of these characters that you think are really interesting? And we went up to Maine, and she had a cinematographer, Donald Cummings, and he took the camera. They figured out how to work the film package, and they were just shooting samples of these people. But the first thing that they shot over the course of a weekend turned out to be Billy the Kid, which was Billy Price, a young kid that she had cast in a short film that she was fascinated by. And he let us follow him around, and she, Donald and Billy had a relationship, and Billy gave Donald intimate access to the filming. So they came back from that weekend, we screened all the footage, and I was like, Jennifer, I think this is a film. Like, this is a whole story has unfolded, So after editing it and working with a couple different editors, we came upon the narrative of Billy the Kid. We went back in the winter to shoot an extra day because he wanted us to film his winter chorale concert. And in that return, and that was sort of like, I think, the fourth day of shooting, which is unheard of that you can make a feature documentary after shooting for 4 or 5 days. It's actually insane, and it probably set the wrong precedent for both of us. But after editing it, we submitted to all these film festivals, and we actually won the South by Southwest Film Festival. We won the LA Film Festival. We won Melbourne. We won Edinburgh. And we thought, oh my God, we're on our way. We sold HBO. I mean, it was probably the easiest trajectory of any film winning any award that there's been in the history of documentary.
And do you think that would have been? I mean, it's an amazing story. And I completely forgotten the story of this actually until you just told it. But I'm curious. I mean, and I'm watching Time as well. But like, has in the same era, like we have streaming introduced, streaming TV, right? Streaming everything introduced in just the last 5-ish years, let's call it.
Right.
And Billy the Kid was released in 2007, 2008. Like, has streaming ushered in a new opportunity for documentary film in a new way, or how do you think it's affecting it?
I think streaming is wonderful and also really unfortunate because there's so much content out there. Anybody can make a documentary film. Documentary is this genre that's so broad, and you really have to pick and choose to find quality films. The good news is that there's more opportunities for people to get distributed, and the bad news is it's just a sort of dump of everything. And it's harder to find films that are really wonderful. There's more opportunities for anybody to be a filmmaker, but it just makes the choosing of it more complicated. So, and I think that streamers are learning now that they can't. They have to be really selective in their choices because audiences are sophisticated. They're really discerning. There's been some really creative, wonderful things that have happened because you don't need tons of money, and that's kind of why I got into documentary, because on a feature, even on a feature independent film, you have to have a lot of money. You have to raise a lot of money. That usually hinges on getting, a celebrity and their whatever schedule to align. In documentary, you had this little camera and we just started following this kid around. It's a little bit different now, of course. But
it's all the precedent of that true story that you get to tell in right. your authentic way.
Right.
So as we think about wrapping up here, Chiemi, I'm curious specifically, I think about, DEI, like representation, let's call it, of diverse and inclusive perspectives, both in front of and behind the camera. I mean, as we look ahead 5 to 10 years, as the expert that you are in filmmaking and specifically documentary, what besides representation, and hopefully that is a trend that will continue, do you think is coming down the pipeline? And what's your greatest hope as well?
I really just hope that the medium continues to embrace creative ideas of structure and form, and mostly that we continue to tell stories that are universally connective, that illuminate. I think what I love most about documentary is the kind of people that have access to making documentaries now can be anyone. You can tell a story. There was a really wonderful film that told the story of the Amazon and, the disappearing indigenous wildlife and how people's lives are being compromised by all of the industry. And you can tell the story that takes place in New Delhi about bird conservators, and you can tell a story about your uncle,
and about Navalny.
I mean, there's so many different ways that we can bring stories to the screen now. And I just hope that continues and people refine their abilities in storytelling, and that we continue to want to know and see these diverse stories and be inspired by them.
Chiemi Karasawa, producer, director, documentary filmmaker, founder of Isotope Films, among other accolades. Thank you for joining us on Future of XYZ today about a fascinating conversation on the future of documentary film.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Well, Thank you for that. And everyone watching or listening, if you're watching, you know already where to find us on YouTube at Rhode Island, ripbs.org/XYZ, or you can find Future of XYZ anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. Please follow us on Instagram at Future of XYZ, and be sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you're paying attention to this. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. And again, Chiemi, thank you. It was a great conversation on the future of documentary film.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lisa. It was wonderful.